Thanks, everyone. Really delighted to have all of you here as we have this interesting discussion on India's green startups. Just to elaborate, I run Green Frontier Capital, which is now an early stage climate change fund. And I've been interested in the area of climate change, deeply inspired by that subject area by Jayant. And of course, I'm very delighted to have two incredible voices on this panel, both Jayant and Neha. Just to give you a little bit of background, Jayant obviously is popularly known, for his work in the Ministry of Finance and Civil Aviation, but a lot of you may not know that he was actually the first person who presented the net zero private net zero transition bill in the Indian Parliament, and has impacted climate policy both directly and indirectly, and continues to do so. So even in his role at Eversource, he's making decisions that is going to position India to be at the pole position of climate change. Neha, of course, is one of the companies that we featured in our book. So it's going to be a very interesting discussion. So zooming out, I'll start my first question to you, Jayant. While we were writing this book, one of the things that you did is that you actually spoke to me and said, let's refer to India as the world's green innovation lab. So my first question to you is going to be, what is it that uniquely positions India to be that world's economic green innovation lab and lead the world towards a green transition situation, both from a policy as well as investment perspective? And do you think the world's taking notice of that?
Thank you very much, Sandeep, for your kind introduction. Thank you also to Inakshi and all of her team for hosting us here and having this very wonderful event so that we can talk about our book. And let me also thank all of you who are here to engage in this dialogue, which I think is very, very important for all of us and certainly for India as well. Now, Sandeep's question was, why is it that India can be a green innovation lab? Why is it that we, for the world, can pioneer new solutions? And the answer is very simple, Sandeep. It's because India's problems are uniquely the problems of the global south. And we can develop these solutions and we can scale them up in a way that virtually no other country in the global south can do that. And I often say that the solutions that we come up with in University Avenue, Palo Alto, or Harvard Square in Cambridge, or Piccadilly Circus in London are not the problems of Jhanda Chowk in Hazaribagh. India's solutions have to be different. They are at different price points, they are at different types of functionality, and we are the country where we can take those solutions and really, really scale them up. And we are seeing that many of the book companies that are featured in the book, Neha's company, for example, is developing solutions that are very geared to India's problems. The Battery Smart company that we have featured in the book is developing solutions for swapping batteries for electric auto rickshaws. Now, last I checked, when you're on University Avenue in Palo Alto, there aren't any auto rickshaws there. So we don't expect Stanford University to come up with a solution for that. So Pulkit, who's actually from IIT Kanpur and well understands the importance of auto rickshaws, has figured out a solution which is unique and that enables auto rickshaw drivers to actually swap lithium-ion batteries from a Kirana store. Now, that model of being able to swap through a neighborhood store your lithium-ion battery and get a charged battery and immediately get going again, which is very important for an auto rickshaw driver that, is earning all of their income from being on the road, that can actually work in Kenya, it can work in Indonesia, it can work in Egypt as well, because they also have auto rickshaws and they have the same problems that India has. So to just conclude on your question, Sandeep, India must be the innovation lab if the global south is able to decarbonize fast enough. And remember that the problem of decarbonization now is a global south problem. It's not a global north problem any longer, because all of the OECD countries, the global north, the 30 countries of the global north, are pretty much going to get close to net zero by 2050, 2060. And even the largest emitter on the planet, which is China, which emits 14 billion tons a year, about 28% of global emissions, even they are committed to getting to net zero by 2060. And the rate at which we are going, you can be fairly confident we'll get there. So if we have to bring down carbon emissions, that will have to happen in the global south. It'll have to happen in India. It'll have to happen in Indonesia. It'll have to happen in Egypt. And the solutions for that are going to be done and developed right here in it.
Yeah, thanks, Jayant. But do you think the world's actually taking notice of the fact that India is going to be leading that revolution?
People realize that, of course, that if we get to 2050, carbon emissions, carbon equivalent emissions right now, which are 60 billion tons. Totally, we are emitting about 60 billion tons of carbon equivalent emissions right now. By 2050, despite all the efforts of the countries in the world, we will still be only at 50 billion tons. We'll have hardly moved the needle. And the reason is that even as the global north is bringing down emissions, the global south is rapidly increasing emissions, including India itself. So India today emits about 3.5 billion tons of carbon equivalent emissions. The expectation is that India will be between 10 to 14 billion tons by 2050. So even as the world is bringing down emissions, places like India are rapidly increasing their emissions simply because our economy is developing as quickly as it is. So the world is paying attention because they understand that if we have to move to a more sustainable future for all of us, it's countries like India and Indonesia and Egypt and Nigeria and Brazil is where really the action has to be in terms of decarbonization.
Great.
And I'll just conclude again this point by saying that, and the only way we can bring down carbon emissions and get to a much greener, sustainable future for all of us is actually not through government policy. It's through green startups, which is why we have profiled them. If we can really help these green startups scale up, and decarbonization sustainability is their business model. That's the only way we are going to reduce emissions. It's going to come from renewable generation companies. It's going from electric vehicle companies. It's going to come from companies like Neha that are recycling.
As you always say, the battle for climate change is going to be fought in India, and it's these same green startups that's going to determine whether India wins that battle or not. So thanks for that. Neha, let's talk a little bit about the spark behind your startup. Talk to us about what actually caused you to move away from a well-paying corporate career at Google to start ZeroCircle, and what is it about the problem that you were trying to solve that was urgent or personal to you that made you start ZeroCircle?
Thanks, Sandeep, and thanks for having me on the panel. I think my journey was not a single moment where I realized that, hey, the world is full of plastic and microplastics and panic, and I found seaweed and I found the answer. I think it was just all over the place and a lot of serendipity. I have had a long corporate career working in tech. I was unhappy because I was looking for technologies that can bring down carbon emissions. I don't come from a tech background. I am an art student from Christ College, Bangalore. So to solve a technical, scientific problem, it gets very, very overwhelming for you, right? Like, how do I even think about this? What is a polymer? What is plastic? How do you even define that chemistry? So my journey really started with working on pro bono basis with architects that build the bridges of Delhi and Mumbai and Marine Drive facelift that happened in 2004. But in that journey, what I really understood was the value of materials and what materials have an impact on climate. What is an LCA? What is life cycle analysis? Why does it matter? And why life cycle analysis today is also very, very narrow-minded, especially when we talk about plastics, but I'll come to that later. And then when I started working on projects, I ended up in a landfill where we were trying to solve a problem of a large manufacturing company that makes tires, and they mentioned their recovery of tires about 5%. Just to give you context, the plastics recycling is at 9%. Tire, which is also a kind of plastic, is 5%. So something which is high paying and you pay a lot of money for that, why is the recovery small? when I was solving the problem of landfills, of course, you won't be surprised if I found plastic there. And while doing stakeholder management, we really understood that what is the value of the material. And there are two things that you really need to solve for. One is the cost of the material needs to be valuable, and the chemistry of the material should be so simple that it goes away without any kind of mismanaged environment. Part two of my life was I was building a seaweed farm with a veteran marine scientist. It's a long story, so I'm going to cut it short. There was a moment when we went scouting all over Mumbai. Of course, Bombay and Juhu, you can't grow seaweed. So we went north of Mumbai, and then we went south of Mumbai. And there was a moment when we started, we top of the hill, we looked down and we were like, this is the spot where we're going to grow seaweed. Month later, we had a farm, COVID happened. Now we were looking at technologies of bringing down carbon, because seaweed grows like 25 times faster than anything that can grow on land, which means it's capturing carbon that fast, right? So it's a great material to bring down carbon. But if you're going to grow so much seaweed, what exactly are you going to sell it for, right? Because there has to be value for a material. And the best match that I found with my personal project with plastics was replacing with this fastest used material in the world, which is thrown away very quickly, is plastics and single-use plastics. And that's when my journey with finding the right people, building the right chemistry, and then making sure any chemistry that we build out goes away without any human action. So the materials that we now make at ZeroCircle replace single-use applications of plastics, and they're so safe that they can go away in any mismanaged environment. And that includes soil, that includes river, that includes ocean, and it also includes your belly. So some of our materials are so safe you can eat them. Even if you eat them by mistake, they're biodigestible, so your body will digest it like food.
Great. You know what? It's really interesting. Neha counts among her investors Tom Ford, Trudy, Styler, and Sting. How did you manage to sit in India and attract these people to your cap table?
We participated in this Tom Ford Challenge, which was a global innovation challenge where the best material science companies in the world participated. And this is not a challenge where your businesses are just looked at in terms of your business models and what they're doing. Our materials were tested for performance, because bioplastics usually have a bad rep. They won't work. Water barrier, performance is going to be bad. Sustainable, which means it's probably going to have poor performance, right? That's usually the criteria. Our materials were tested for 1.5 years. In fact, one of the best tests that happened was a kilogram of thin films made out of seaweed were fed to the gut of a whale, simulated environment in Seattle Aquarium, and our materials pass that test. So that means that it's not just marine degradable. If in the process of degradation in the ocean, and any ocean organism were to consume it, be it turtles or whale, it will also get digested. And we won the award, and Trudy Styler was one of the grand prize jury. So when they came down to India, you put the money where your mouth is, and then you say that, hey, I would love to sort of support that mission. That's the story.
And how did your first prototype take shape?
So this was in the, I think it's a little bit of a morbid joke, so don't judge me for that. This happened during COVID. We were looking for a lab. You can't find a lab. It's probably a kitchen that you can find, right? But to make a polymer, a chemistry product, Nestle supported us, but even Nestle could not let us into their R&D centers because it's 2020. These centers off in the corner of India, somewhere in the remote location of West Bengal, the Britishers forgot to sort of shut down that lab, I would put it that way. And we were sitting in one corner of a QA lab, and our team used to sit with torches in the middle of the night because it was in an industrial area. Because during the day there would be cross fumigations and chemicals that can interact. So with torches and lights in the middle of the night, my team would make this prototype. That prototype was then tested by Nestle. The application that we were building out for Nestle was a little, everybody knows Maggie, I would assume. and the metallic masala strip that you get from that, we made it completely degradable. So you don't take out the aluminum sachet, you throw it in the Maggi and make it a little more viscous and nice and soupy with that, and no waste would be generated. So you don't have to worry about biodegradation. You can talk about how yummy your Maggi gets.
That's really cool, by the way. Jayant, let's move to policy levers. You've obviously worn many hats, venture capitalists, government policy. What's that one policy change that would be a game changer in your opinion for India's green startups?
Actually, let me give you three, because I think three are really required. Number one, I think we need a green taxonomy. So the Honorable Finance Minister has spoken about that several times, but it's very important for us to have a green taxonomy, because once we have a green taxonomy, then we know what's in, what's out, and there are various concessional finance or blended finance instruments then we can use once we know what's in, what's out. So number one, we need, of course, a green taxonomy. Number two, and these are all steps towards number three. Number two, we need well-functioning carbon markets in India. So the European Union has put in place a very well-designed carbon trading system that starts with sort of voluntary permits and then gets tighter and tighter over time, but that establishes a price for carbon and enables people to trade carbon credits back and forth. I think we need a similar system for India. The government has already passed legislation to that effect, but that would help us develop a price for carbon, and all the wonderful work that Neha and other companies are doing can then also get that benefit as well, which is the carbon credits. And then the third one, which you pointed to already, Sandeep, is we need a net zero bill for India. Again, the countries that are advancing towards net zero in a very methodical, sustained way, like for example New Zealand or the UK or even the European Union, have through legislation by law, said that they have to get to net zero by a certain date. Now, if we establish 2070, which the Honorable Prime Minister has already announced, and we say that we're going to get there by 2070, we have to then annually work out what is our carbon budget. And that has to come down every year, so that's the only way we can actually get to net zero by 2070. And that's a template, a framework that other countries have also adopted, a net zero bill with a carbon budget. And in fact, a climate commission, just like, for example, we have a finance commission that can then work on figuring out what the budget should be for different industries, different states, at the national level, report on it, etc. So there's a whole administrative setup. We've created the GST Council, we've created other administrative frameworks like this. I think we need to do the same thing for climate as well, for sustainability as well, and that's what other countries have done. So you said one, let me give you the three that are required again. We need a green taxonomy, we need carbon markets, and we need a net zero implementation mechanism.
Great. You've obviously famously coined the phrase net zero is net positive. Can you elaborate for the audience what you mean by that phrase?
Well, now you're asking me to wear the hat of a politician. And as a politician, you recognize कि बात को चिपका देना होता है. बात को चिपकाना होता है. And if you want to get something that's genuinely sticky, it has to be, Sandeep, memorable. Yeah. So to make it memorable, I coined this phrase, net zero is net positive. So when you hear that, you kind of do a double take. What do you mean? How can net zero be net positive? But it is actually net positive, because all the modeling, and in fact Asia Society has also done modeling and research on this. What we find is that when India goes to net zero, when we decarbonize, when we move towards green solutions, we are actually increasing GDP growth rates. We are actually increasing job creation. We are actually reducing air pollution. We are improving our energy security and our balance of payments. So net zero, in that sense, is net positive. It's actually much, much better for India. And this is done, this modeling work that has been done assuming that we can continue to grow at our growth rate right now, which is between 6 to 7%. Even with that growth rate in mind, net zero is net positive. But a lot of people believe, and in fact, there have been several reports on this as well, that to assume that we can grow at 6 to 7% when the world is warming as fast as it is, actually may not be correct. And economists call this the climate damage function, Sandeep, the climate damage function. And there are a lot of very reputable economists and reports that have come out and said that we could lose somewhere between 0.5 to 1% of GDP growth rate because of these climate effects as well. So therefore, net zero could be very much net positive because the delta becomes much larger. The delta is not between 6-7% growth and 8 or 9% growth. It becomes, let's say, 5-6% growth and 8 or 9% growth. So the delta becomes much larger. So good, thorough, detailed economic analysis, and this is actually some of the work I'm doing at the London School of Economics, would take into account what is India's growth rate likely to be as the costs and damage associated with climate change start to get more and more serious as the years go on. And we know we are on a very rapid warming rate, so we know that there's going to be a lot of challenges that we and all the other countries in the world are going to have to deal with.
Gotcha. Back to the startup trenches, Neha, with you. What's the biggest challenge that you faced coming from the legacy plastics industry? Is it financial? Is it technical? Is it regulatory challenges? What are the biggest challenges, and how are you planning to address those challenges in an effective way?
I think the challenges, I think you covered all the challenges in that list.
Which among them would be the biggest challenge, you think?
I would say the largest challenges are more ecosystem challenges. Usually cost and performance and throughputs are usually symptomatic challenges, but the bigger challenges are ecosystem. When you're making, for example, plastic replacement for the packaging industry, your end consumer is a B2B consumer, which is a brand, which is right in the end. But for a material science company, you're developing an input material that goes, think of it as a BSF or a Reliance. We're nowhere close to that scale. But think of that as an input provider, which then sells to a Huhtamaki, that makes that into a film, and that film then gets converted into a packaging material, and that packaging material will then go to your favorite brand, let's say used by Godrej, right? So Godrej becomes the absolute end consumer. I'll give you an example of the challenges that we see in packaging. We're working with one of the largest packaging companies that packages fruits and vegetables in Europe. And the biggest market is potato packaging, a big one in Germany. Their packaging is largely jute-based, but jute is lined with plastics inside. And because of the policies in Europe, they need to replace this plastic. The challenge here is, how do you remove the plastic? Because where is this jute bag coming from? It's coming from West Bengal. Somehow West Bengal is featuring a lot in my stories. But it comes from West Bengal. Now the manufacturer currently just coats the jute bag, bags it up, and then sends it over to Germany. My challenge is not to sort of replace the packaging of the buyer in Germany, but work with this manufacturer, because this manufacturer does not want to change whatever is not broken, right? There is no policy that's stopping them. So how do you sort of solve an ecosystem problem? Because at scale, with good funding from all these lovely people in this group, we can solve the problem of cost, performance, scale, and even retrofit these products into the ecosystem. But even if I'm retrofitting that, how do you make sure that this buyer who's talking to me wants to retrofit it? Because why should they? Because these are legacy businesses, they don't want to change. So it requires a shift from the brand side, where you start doing tripartite agreements, and you ask the bills to sort of push the buck backwards onto the manufacturer, and then manufacturers working backwards with us.
Okay.
So,
all right, so let's get both of you in on a couple of questions. As Jayant has already mentioned, India is going to be looked upon as a green innovation lab for global solutions. How have you built and tested in ways that are uniquely Indian?
Hyper customization and hyper localization, challenge and an opportunity. Again, I can give a very quick example. When we sell burger boxes which are coated with seaweed coating, in India, typically, outside of India, you typically have a manufacturer, distributor, wholesaler, retailer, and then goes to a brand. in India, a small bakery shop will directly go to the manufacturer. And for 500 pieces, they would ask for customization. So as a large manufacturer, how do you solve for hyper-localization, hyper-customization? Aside the problems of India that he said, the temperature that you're looking at, the climatic conditions you're looking at much, much harsher conditions. You're looking at very, very margin dilutive products. So how do you solve that problem while you're solving the problem of localization, short-term inventory, and customization? So that's a challenge.
I'm going to ask you a follow-up tough question on that. Are your customers paying you a green premium for what you're doing?
So I think the question that you should be asking is, are they paying as much as what they're already for other products in the market? I would say we meet the exact prices of the products that are already being sold in the market. The green premium is a subjective one, because what is the relative to green premium? There are multiple transitions that we're seeing in the industry. Polyethylene, which is the big oil, which becomes the traditional plastics. And then there is the chemical industry, which may not necessarily fall in the petroleum oil zone, but it's chemical at the same time. We're able to meet the cost of the chemical products, which may be higher than petroleum, but it's a big, it's a proud moment for us to actually meet the prices of the chemical industry.
Jayant, you've always talked about unit economics for a lot of these startups being positive for their long-term sustainability. One of the challenges for a lot of these companies is when they scale to a point of requiring growth capital, the Indian ecosystem doesn't exist for the kind of challenges that they are addressing. How do you see these companies accessing capital to grow their businesses when they're scaling? Because it's easy to create lab level prototypes that work, but when you actually have to scale, they just don't have the access to a growth ecosystem. So how are they going to?
So Sandeep, that's the $1 billion question, right? Which is, if you can crack that code, you're going to be a unicorn. And it's very, very hard. And exactly as you said, you've got to make sure the unit economics work. So in Neha's case, for example, you can take it as 1 kg of, let's say, seaweed-based recyclable plastic that you're making. If at 1 kg, just looking at contribution, not looking at any fixed overheads and so on, just looking at roughly the contribution margin or the gross margin, you can use either of the two. Those have to be very, very profitable. So what I would suggest to Neha as she's thinking about scaling is, make sure that when you meet the price point, and there is no green premium, let's be clear, nobody's going to pay more, unfortunately, for anything that's organic or recyclable and all of that, particularly not in the global south, because we're a paisa vasool economy, a scarcity driven economy. So in a paisa vasool economy, you don't get a premium, right? What you do get is differentiation, and so that's what you have to try and convince your customers on. But then at that same price point, for 1 kg of seaweed-based plastic, are you getting a gross margin or contribution margin of 40 to 50% or not? If you're not getting 40 to 50%, then the unit economics don't work. It's very difficult to scale. You just don't have the foundation to scale. So it requires a lot of work of solutions, technology development to get to that level of contribution margin. Once you get to that level of contribution margin, then you have the resources to be able to invest in go-to-market, and go-to-market is also very expensive. But without that, you really can't proceed. So when you then move towards the go-to-market part of really opening up market access and solving the ecosystem problems and all of that, you will find venture capitalists who will back you, because the inherent unit economics work. The biggest mistake I find people make all the time is to think that you can make it up on growth. You can't make up unit economics on growth, because that's just a recipe for losing more money quickly. And most companies that get into trouble then get into this valuation trap where they're chasing growth because they say, oh, look at how fast I'm growing, therefore give me a higher revenue multiple, give me a higher valuation and raise more money. But sooner or later, that falls apart. So you can't chase growth, you can't scale until your unit economics are fundamentally really, really sound. And that is, I think, a very foundational concept that, entrepreneurs in India should be absolutely crystal clear about. Don't chase growth until you've nailed down your unit economics. Now, whether that's a shop, whether that's 1 kg of her product, whether it's an electric vehicle, whether it's an auto rickshaw, whatever that unit is, make sure that unit is delivering that kind of contribution margin. Otherwise, you can't invest in go-to-market, you can't invest in talent acquisition, and you will not be investable and scalable.
And that's a very important point, especially for founders who are sitting in this group. I mean, unit economics have to be positive if you want to continue to access capital continuously. Just a couple of questions before we open it up to the audience. Jayant, is the Global South, India specifically, getting a seat at the table when it comes to global climate finance, especially given your position right now? And what would you urge founders and investors to do to amplify India's voice globally?
No, that's a great question, Sandeep. Of course, the Global South, India being right at the head of that table, is able to make its voice heard. There's no question about it. Unfortunately, the money is not there, right? The real challenge for us in moving towards sustainability, moving to decarbonization, is the massive amount of investment that's required. As I said, net zero is net positive, but there's a catch to that. The reason it's net positive is because we'll be investing so much more. And when you invest a lot more in the economy, obviously you create more jobs and more growth and all of that. What's the scale of the investment that's required for India to be on a sustainable net zero trajectory? We have to double corporate capex. Now, many of you here, of course, are from the corporate sector. You're going to have to double your investments. So today, India invests about $60 to $70 billion in total on corporate capex. We need to invest an additional $50 to $100 billion more if we have to be in any kind of meaningful net zero trajectory. And for that, we need climate finance. We need finance because the capital actually is in the global north. They have a capital surplus, whereas we in the global south have a capital deficiency. So money has to flow from the global north to the global south. If it does so, it's a win-win-win for everyone. It's a win for the planet, a win for the global north because they can generate returns and growth, and obviously it's a win for the global south because net zero is net positive. But we've got to get those capital flows. And that's really a lot of the work I'm doing right now, is to figure out how we can use 5-10% of the money as concessional capital to really unlock 80-90% of commercial capital. How do we do that? What are the blended finance instruments? What are the policy interventions? Which, by the way, all have to happen in the global north, because it's their money that's coming to India. So what can we do? Can we do long-term currency hedging? Can we have climate insurance pools that we can create? Can we have concessional credit? Can we have credit guarantees of various kinds? Can we have, concessional capital for first loss funds? All of these kinds of blended finance instruments are required, Sandeep, so that we can unlock the trillions of dollars that are required to actually get to net zero.
Yeah, and by the way, Jayant was the first person who had predicted that climate change is $100 billion per year opportunity for India for the next 2 decades at least. At the time that he came up with that, and I sort of used to repeat that at conferences that I spoke at, people used to laugh at me. Now it's become a reality and we're closer to it than ever before. Last question before we open it up, and this is something that was brought up before we started this panel. It's a big one, greenwashing. How do we make sure that companies, I'll start with you, blend purpose with real performance and not just optics? And by the way, how do you improve authenticity in what you do?
I can speak for ZeroCircle,
Yeah.
And how we do it. And every founder will find their own individual ways of solving for that. Greenwashing, in a lot of conversations, and people who do greenwashing don't realize they're doing greenwashing. That's the fundamental problem that I find with greenwashing. Especially, how exactly are you looking at greenwashing? Are you looking at greenwashing from carbon credits? Are you looking at greenwashing from a point of view of microplastics? Are you looking at greenwashing primarily from a certification point of view? So to my advice to other founders would be as compliant as possible against certifications and the highest stringent international standards. The reason why that's important, and it costs a ton of money, trust me, we spend a dedicated amount of money that we raise into certifications, because the harder it takes to be compliant against greenwashing, the easier it gets for you to shine in the world that you're the only ones who are compliant and transparent in ways that the world can relate with. Very simple example is, this may seem like boasting, but why would I be on the panel then, right? ZeroCircle is the only company in Asia that now has a certification of being plastic free.
We need a applause for that, please.
And greenwashing comes very close to policy and policy defenders coming together and creating clear definitions of exactly what you're trying to sell. This happened with the whole vegan wave and don't call it milk and plastic and then don't call it bioplastics. And there are several other things, and there's a very good initiative that Europe had taken a few years ago, which was the European Single-Use Plastics Directive, where they defined what plastics was. Because the greenwashing came from, hey, are you biodegradable? Are you home compostable? I'm sure as consumers, you're tired of that. You're like, I don't know what I'm buying, and is this compostable, real compostable or not? So what they said is, if you're going to claim something to be plastic-free, let's define plastics. And they went ahead and they said that even if this material came from starch or your favorite kale, it doesn't matter. If it was modified or synthesized in any way, it will be considered plastic, and plastics are not allowed in a certain category. That makes things so much easier when it comes to greenwashing. So my request to founders would be, your North Star is certifications. I know it costs a ton of money and there are certain biases, but that has something that has always helped ZeroCircle.
Jayant, your take.
So Sandeep, I think President Trump has solved that problem. Instead of greenwashing, now we have brownwashing, right? So I don't think we need to worry about that anymore.